Welcome everybody to the inaugural podcast of Tower Prep, dedicated to everybody's favorite non-idle tower defense game. This podcast is coming live from a beach resort in Florida. I have just deboarded an airplane and arrived for a conference. So I'm doing this not only for the first time, but also from a hotel room with my laptop. So we will see how it goes. This is, of course, our first episode. I have a vague idea about the structure and various things that we can do with the podcast, but it is new. So I am always open to suggestions, and I hope to get some feedback from people. What kind of topics they want covered, what kinds of things they might want me to do, and to see if there's any traction at all to this discussion. I would say that the centerpiece of this game is the community. Longevity of the game has centered around the community that has been built around it, predominantly on Discord, though there is the community on Reddit as well. If you are listening this from a Reddit link and have not joined the Discord, I would strongly encourage you to join that Discord. It is a very active community, lots of interesting takes on the game, strategies, and information for a surprisingly complex amount of strategies that we can throw at what is supposed to be essentially an idle tower defense game. So in the spirit of that community and being centered around that community, I thought I would give a shot at trying to do a podcast for that community to give us another avenue for spreading information, discussing the game, both strategies and the overall state of the game that we have all spent a considerable amount of time and effort dedicated. So, who am I and what credentials do I bring to even be doing this podcast? I would say that I am probably one of the oldest active players in the game. I certainly did not join as one of the very first players, but I was active near the very, very, very beginning of the game. And most of the players that joined around the time I did, I don't think there's too many that are still super active. So I have been through every iteration, every meta, and every major patch of this game, so have sort of a long-term perspective on it. With probably one of the most extensive lab and ultimate weapon researches out there. I'm sure there are a few players that have done more than I have, but not by much and not many. That does mean that while my perspective is long, my perspective is influenced heavily by the end game. So exactly what I can have to say about the state of the early game and mid game remains to be seen, though I would argue that the early game and mid game for the tower has not shifted too much. The early game is all about maximizing and optimizing economy, getting your labs pushed out, getting your cards selected. That's been the setup almost from the beginning. I'd say that most of the interesting changes and push and pull occurring in the development of this game really is that late game, in game material where there'll probably be an extensive focus on this podcast. And if you're not yet at that stage, hopefully listening to this will give you a clue about where things are headed and maybe help you plan ahead. That doesn't mean that I don't plan to visit the experience of the game at various points. We'll hopefully maybe have topics, maybe even whole podcasts dedicated to the early game experience. Maybe we'll bring in some of the people that wrote the frequently asked questions or the guides and have some strategies for new or mid-game players as part of the podcast as well. So that is basically who I am and why I'm doing this. All right, let's jump into it. So I think one of the first things that I will do in each podcast is to talk a little bit about the state of the game. I think there's sort of three primary areas in which we can think about the meta strategies and ways we go about playing the game. The first is the farm game, which refers to how we farm coins, gems, to maximize our tower builds, what that looks like. The tournaments, of course, for earning stones and demonstrating our superiority to our fellow tower players. And then leaderboard pushing, which is not an area that is super focused in the community at the moment, but I think is an interesting aspect of gameplay that I would actually like to see a little more focus on. So the state of the game for a long time has focused on what we call EHP, or effective health point builds. These are builds that rely on using orbs and other instant kills to avoid being hit by small mobs. And then we just tank damage from the bosses and kill them with thorns. The ability to keep only bosses as the primary damaging unit means that pretty much our full health plus all the overheal we get effectively determines how far we can push. Most of us have been farming the game at various points using the EHP strategy, and it is probably one of the very first meta strategies people will move into once they've developed a decent coin and research base. Where you choose to farm depends widely on where you are at in terms of your research and your labs, but essentially it is grinding out tiers lower than what you are capable of doing, with most in-game players focusing somewhere on T9 to maximize coin gain. A lot of this is driven by perks, which require a lot of waves, thousands of waves to maximize under most conditions, which is why we farm in those lower tiers to give us the maximum amount of waves with full perk load. With the recent changes to the game, though, we are seeing an emergence of what we call a damage build or a glass cannon build start to reemerge. The glass cannon was the only meta when the game first launched. For those of you who have not been around for a while, our HP used to be out in the low millions, which meant that mob damage, was one-shotting us way before our damage ran out. And that got buffed with HP now outscaling damage for many thousands of waves, and that's where the current EHP meta came from. The damage builds and the glass cannon builds then have pretty much disappeared, but we have seen the introduction of several new mechanisms, specifically with the latest update of 17 of Spotlight and Amp Bot, along with some prior updates like buffs to damage, increases in damage in smart missiles, as well as things like the Berserker card, which have pushed damage now almost to the point where it can compete with effective HP builds even in the lower tiers, and certainly outcompete them in some of the higher tiers. This has introduced strategies now where people pushing that damage meta can actually farm at higher tiers. Predominantly tier 11 seems to be showing some of the greatest return in coins based on those damage builds. The issue, of course, is that in order to do that, you have to have pretty extensive investment. We're talking across the board. You need your workshop pretty much maxed. You need extensive development of your damage labs. And you need the following ultimate weapons all but maxed: Smart Missiles, Chronos Field, Inner Landmine, Spotlight. You also need the Amp Bot, with a good range as well as a decent amplification to maximize those gains. That's a lot of investment, but the good news is with that investment, we are seeing damage actually do a little bit better than effective HP in terms of the overall coins that you can get from farming for those people that predominantly don't actually need coins anymore. And that is a whole other conversation to be had. Those of us that have farmed 40 trillion coins are doing it purely for the dopamine and the potential flex of that 100 trillion coin roll on the Discord, which makes all of us feel better about ourselves. Those people that still really need the coins probably aren't going to be running any of these damage builds anytime soon. Right? Though that has introduced several interesting sub-games, one of the ones in which I'll take partial credit for popularizing, which are, for example, farming in T11 and trying to see how many waves you can go before you take any damage at all. Basically, it's don't activate the Berserker card, and we see how high we can get on that. Sky has developed a set of rules for that that are available on the Discord if anybody wants to play. But generally, because of the need for investment in the damage meta, it's not a strong push in the farm. Like I said, those people who are farming for anything other than clout probably aren't running that damage, right? It's going to be effective HP. That means that there's now a lot of interest in how the damage meta can play out in tournaments. Tournaments, though, it's probably the biggest friction point in the community right now. Reason why damage or effective HP or any of these other strategies struggle is because the speed at which tournaments are developing. We were, with the use of Blender and other strategies that minimized or eliminated damage from anything but bosses, we were pushing into 3,000, 4,000 waves in the tournament. Bud's wanting to speed up the tournament. So he wanted to try to basically kill Blender. He wanted to get mobs through our orbs, and he decided to use speed as an approach, giving us less waves in the tournament. I don't think anybody is upset about having tournaments end at 2,000 waves rather than 4,000 waves, especially when you introduce the issue of micro. Problem is the engine doesn't support the speed that he's pushing these mobs at, which means that a lot of people are going down to 1x speed, right? We all work so hard to get our 5x speed. Now we're shifting down to 1x speed, which is just awful. That's just an awful way to play, and is ultimately causing the tournaments to last longer time-wise than when we were pushing 4K waves, right? It's also a really sort of nasty way to play. It's just, there's a difference between a nerf that lowers your sort of effective ability in the game and what we're seeing with these fast mobs, right? They're random. They're device dependent on how much damage they can do and how often they hit you. There doesn't seem to be any control over them. They're causing us to make really toxic gameplay choices like the 1x speed, and overall is a really unpleasant sort of approach to the gameplay as opposed to just a nerf. This speed, of course, limits the amount of time we have for damage on the boss, thus capping the glass cannon type approaches. But they're also nasty for effective HP builds, as you'll just get chipped to death from the speeding mobs. The engine chugs on this so badly, right, that if you're watching the game, you can actually see the fast mobs move in a single frame from outside tower range to bam, hitting you. Several people have found ways to reduce significantly the amount of chips we get. Grimlord being the most obvious with his recent dominance of the tournament. Props to him. I would hazard to guess, though he's teasing us with his very strategies, that a lot of it comes down to stuns, his poison swamp, ILM, other things like that, keeping the mobs at bay, giving his multi-shot chance to juggle them, which again throws in another ultimate weapon that we have to have maxed with good labs to really compete. I may be wrong. Maybe he's discovered a secret magic range that eliminates these chips as an issue. Problem is all we're doing then is pushing things down the road, right? The whole reason why we got the faster mobs was to reduce the tournament time, right? And if all we do is find a way around that, no longer get the chips, we're right back to where we were, right? So I don't know. This seems like a untenable point right now in development, and needs to see some pretty significant change. And if you read the Discord, you'll see that this is one of the primary conversations people are having, right? They hate the RNG factors of the tournament. The fast mobs is probably one of the most toxic things we're dealing with right now. But you slow the mobs back down, and we're right back to the toxic gameplay of Death Defy and Wave Skip, right? 2 coin flips. You know, did you skip a boss wave? Did you get a Death Defy before an energy shield? Right? And we can add 500, 1,000, 2,000 waves on top of what you should be able to get by complete random chance, right? And so we slow down the mobs, we're right back to hating on Wave Skip, Death Defy, and Energy Shield again. So I think we you know, things other than the boss need to be dangerous to us, right? I think that is something that has to happen, right? If Blender and Frogger and these other methods that eliminate, you know, any of the other mob types from being remotely a danger to us, why even have them outside of just, you know, farming them for resources, right? We're in the kill a million boars in Warcraft to level up at 1 XP a notch territory, right? Why have these if they aren't a danger to us, right? And I get where Fuds is coming from. Like, we need to make things dangerous, or we wind up in these ridiculous gameplay scenarios that we see in the tournament. But they need to be made dangerous in a way that is predictable, in a sense that, like, we understand where it's coming from, we see why, and there's things we can do to do better, right? This is the idea that actually playing the game should make us better at playing the game, and in particular, do better in those tournaments, right? I mean, that's what it comes down to. Yes, like, we like the stones, but tournaments is our PvP. Tournaments is where we pit our tower against other people's tower to see how we do, right? Are we doing better? Where do we rank relative to our fellow players? Right? It's a rush, right? It's something that we all sort of enjoy doing. We enjoy a fun game. You know, we enjoy winning or losing, you know, and not that we enjoy losing, but sometimes it's gonna be fun, right? When, you know, you're with another good player, you're pushing towards your max, and you know, good game, right? Win or lose, right? It's a fun aspect of the gameplay, right? But right now the problem is that there's nothing we as players can do, right? Like, it doesn't matter how much research you have in Ultimate Weapons, how much lab time you have, how many coins you have, you know, how many Tapjoy offers you have done, how much money you've poured into gems. It doesn't matter how much you've played the game. It doesn't matter how much you've upgraded your tower. You reach a point where the RNG takes over, and that's what decides the outcome, right? And this occurs pretty early in the game, right? So somebody with 6 months to a year, and maybe even thousands of dollars more investment in the game, can easily lose, right, by this pure RNG, right? So while I get the principle of making these mobs dangerous, right, something other than bosses need to be able to kill us, it needs to be done in such a way that our labs, that our ultimate weapons, that our workshops can actually let us survive longer as we play the game, right? So make them dangerous, but make it in a way that is not driven predominantly by device, right? You know, the faster your device, the better you perform, right? And that's not right, right? Or just pure unadulterated RNG, right, is unpleasant to play, right? It's also detrimental to the game as a whole, right? Because Buds is developing this game to earn an income, right? I know it's not his job, but he's earning money from it, which pays for him to be able to put the development time behind it, to pay for other developers to work on the game, right? And money needs to be earned, right? And the fact of the matter is, in mobile games, a small percentage of your players are going to represent your greatest amount of money earned on that game, right? And you're reaching a point now where there's no reason for anybody to buy gems or buy stones, because they will not actually make them better at the game, right? So why do it? Even if people continue to play the game, it just means, right, that you're cutting off. I don't know. It's the death knell for this game, right? Playing the game has to improve your performance in the game, particularly with the tournaments. So, there's a lot of conversations going on right now on the Discord about that. Last I saw, they were even talking about forming a community to try to organize all of these thoughts and suggestions. I don't know how much of a role we have in providing specific suggestions about how to fix the game as much as outlining the problems, right? If as a developer has a vision for the game, like how he wants to fix it, that's fine. If we got some ideas, let's throw them out there, but it's up to him to decide how he wants to address it. But we as players also have a right to sort of inform what the state of the game is like to play, what our experience of that game is. And, those need to be addressed at some level, especially when they're at this level where they are toxic in a sense. And promoting, right? I joke about how this is, everybody's favorite non-idle defense game. And a lot of it has to do with the microing that people are doing in tournaments. I remember when we first started talking about the Morb strategy, right, where we were moving orbs around on the screen to kill bosses. I was done mostly as a joke. I didn't think anybody would have the patience for that, but I was proven wrong. People definitely have the patience for it. And now the number of things that you can micro to maximize your tournament runs, I'm not even going to say it because I don't want to spread that gameplay around. People are going to discover it though. It's going to become ridiculous. And the issue is that, if we all as a community came together and said, look, we're not doing this, right? It's one thing, but it's a prisoner's dilemma, right? That's not going to happen, right? You're with another player, who's a good player. They want to maximize, the chances of winning, and you're in this prisoner's dilemma over whether you're going to micro or not, right? If you both agree not to micro, you both win. But if one person doesn't micro, the other does micro, they win. And so the optimal selfish strategy is to always micro, and we get into these nasty traps, or we just give up and say, okay, I'm going to lose. And then we get, salty and petulant about the gameplay, which is where we're at, right? So that's, really the sort of state of this tournament where, hopefully we're going to see slow those mobs down, right? Bring it back in so our devices can handle it. Bring it back in so we can play at 5 times speed, right? Maybe deal with some of those Death Defy and Energy Shield combinations. And let's start thinking about ways of making things other than bosses a danger to us in a way that allows our tower upgrades to advance us further. I think there's a lot of answers to that. And again, the developer is the ultimate decision maker in that. But if we as a community have some of those specific ideas, I think we should. But I think we need to keep in mind the end goal, right? We don't want to go back to old school Frogger Blender days where it's like we're immune to everything but bosses, right? I don't think that's viable long-term gameplay, and I think it would be more fun for the game to get more dangerous and more dangerous the further we get, in waves. But again, in a way where our gameplay, our researches, our advancement allows us to push a little bit further each time. The last sort of part of the state of the game is the idea of leaderboard pushing. Nobody's really paying much attention to that at the moment. I think there's a few things driving that, not the least of which is the Discord roles are now based on tournament waves. And you'll notice wherever the Discord roles focus on is where everybody focuses on. Back in the day, pushing highest tier wave count was what everybody focused on because that's what the Discord roles were based on. And when they shift the Discord roles to tournament waves, everybody goes to that. This tells you again the beauty of the community where it really is centered around that damn Discord. And we do like our ability to flex on that. But we now have the in-game T12 leaderboard, which is a kind of a cool addition. But again, not many people are talking about it. I think part of the problem is, one where it's rife with hacking. The global leaderboards are obviously people who have hacked the game. And so therefore it doesn't mean a whole lot. But we do have those weekly and monthly leaderboard pushes, which I think would be fun to, as a community, to put a little more focus on that, a little trash talk, bring that into the rotation. Because that introduces our ability to have perks as part of the gameplay, and perks actually help out a lot with the mob speed. Also, they're not going as fast as in the T10 Plus. So a lot of the really nasty, toxic issues we're dealing with in tournaments, leaderboards. I mean, I'm not gonna say they don't have them. Microwing and other issues are a part of that. Then you get into the wave skip, energy shield, death defy, coin flip. So yeah, I mean, the game is what the game is. But I think if we, as a community, got some of us a little more excited about leaderboard pushing, it'd be kind of fun. But the leaderboard pushing is going to be damage glass cannon builds. There's no way that EHP builds. You're not going to be able to build up your devos, and you're just going to cap out way too quick on EHP. So that's glass cannon all the way. So I don't know. Maybe as more and more people move into the glass cannon meta, there'll be more focus on leaderboards. Thought one of the next things I would do is take a look at some of the best and worst suggestions submitted on the Discord based on the up and down votes on the wish list. I think in the future, maybe I'll try to codify this into the top 5 or worst 5 of your suggestions. But for the moment, I just gathered up some of the most highly upvoted and some of the most highly downvoted suggestions and thought we'd take a look at them and talk about them. So one of the first ones back just before Christmas came from Pyram. Suggestion 2962 received quite a bit of upvotes. Raise your hand if you remember the mythical 8 times. Now raise your hand if you want it back. All right, I'm assuming that's referring to the Devo cap, right? Much health Death Wave can give you during devolution, right? It was capped at 8 times. Now it's capped at 7 times, and they're looking for it back. I mean, sweet summer child, man, that used to be not capped, right? That wasn't even a cap. Those were the days. That was when my damage labs and other people's damage labs could really come out to play, as we would push 22, 26, 30 times health HP. That got nixed pretty quickly to 8 times, and it drops down to 7 times. I mean, it's big numbers, right? I mean, people like big numbers. If you're going to cap it, I don't think it matters all that much where the cap is. I mean, the bigger the cap, the more, lab and workshop development matters, right? That if you have good damage labs, you can push a higher cap, right? Lazy Devo and other strategies kind of come into play. The higher the cap, the harder it is for people to do that. And there's more advantage, right, to more established long-term players as far as that goes. At the end of the day, I mean, everybody's cap is the same, and it just determines, right, how big your HP levels get. The higher it is, the more you can farm, the further we can go in tournaments, maybe in regards to chipping. But if everybody's cap is the same, I don't think it's that big of a deal. I like their big numbers. Next one, we have suggestion 2964 from Tornado Plasma Bot. Add a lab for Super Tower card. While active, it would also give stat boost to a wide range of different stats, such as increased bounce shot range, more multi-shot targets, more knockback, maybe rapid fire duration, etc. I think Sky has another one similar to that. Super Tower doesn't do a heck of a lot, right? And people are just looking for fun ways to make the card work. I don't have anything particularly for that, right? I mean, obviously Super Tower doesn't do all that much, right? It can be nice in a damage build to an extent, but really most of the damage that we're doing to the boss and glass cannon builds are coming other than tower damage. So Super Tower is meh. So making Super Tower, more fun to play, more useful, more game mechanics, that's always fun. And another one from Tornado Plasma Bot that got a lot of upvotes just right after it, 2965. Make ILM explode on range projectile. Just a nice little use for ILM to help counter range. All right, so I'm assuming that means that he wants the inner landmines to actually block. I think a lot of us have thought about that. The biggest issue is, as we were talking about earlier on the podcast, we need things other than bosses to be dangerous to us, right? And fast and range are about the only thing that can be effective counters right now. The more we decrease the scariness of range, the more we wind up in situations like T10 plus, where we can't even see the damn mobs with how fast they're going. So I don't know. Like, I don't have anything inherently against that, but it needs to be done within the context of an overhaul, right? And we need to see where the game is going as far as how are we going to make things dangerous, and where do things fit. Moving down the list, 2969. We have a suggestion from Evelyn. When it's a double gem event with Tapjoy, maybe the game should give an add gem event where you get 2 times gems or 3 times gems from ads. Yeah, we all like our gems, I guess. There's a whole nother conversation that would be had about economy inflation with gems and stones and other things. I'm going to save that for another podcast. But I can see why players would be excited about getting more gems, but there's issues with that, the health and longevity of the game. Moving down to 2973, we got a suggestion from Sky. Stop tying game features to local time and make everything based on server time. Yeah, I think that needs to happen. There's a whole lot of wonkiness that goes on because of that. Not all of it is legitimate either. I think we just need to have UTC times for everything. We can all get comfortable for when that is, and daylight savings time can screw it up for us twice a year. But yeah, I think that's a good idea. You have a couple more from Sky. 2975, a new workshop upgrade to reduce how far away range enemies fire from. Again, it gets back into that idea of making our upgrades meaningful and making us more powerful, which is nice. But we also have to avoid, right, the situation where we become completely immune to everything but boss damage again, right? So I think we're all hoping that there's going to be a big overhaul of range and mobs that will, provide some of that increasing danger and risk as we move further into the game. And I'd like to see where that lands before we start, messing around too much with extra defenses. All right, let's look at some of our larger downvotes. We got suggestion 2979 from Evelyn. At the end of runs with accumulated cash, you open up a shop where you can buy lab acceleration tokens to accelerate the time it takes to research a lab. Say $1 billion total cash for 1 hour speed research for 25 gems. I mean, come on, that's it's all about the starting cash, guys, right? Like, you have to maximize your starting cash. I've been telling you for months that starting cash is the meta, but yeah, cash is king, right? I mean, I get it. We build up all of these resources. We have it, at the end of the run, and then poof, they're gone. I think that kind of flies in the face, though, of the heart of what this game is, and why I think what's fueling that is the idea is that things that we earn in a game like cash stay within that run, right? We already have coins and gems that we can earn for other investment, and cash is within a run. Also, I just I don't think we need more ways to rush labs at the moment. Another big downvote. This one comes from Sky, who had a couple of our big upvotes, but this one was not very popular. We're ready for perks in tournaments. 2982. He has quite a bit to say about how to implement that, but people do not seem too excited about this idea. I think it's because of the fear of the elongated gameplay, which is because most of you are probably thinking about how long you have to stay up to micro your damn game if you have perks. Whereas if you just stop microing your game, you could select your perks and go to bed and see where your game winds up. But, I don't know. I think perks could be fun, right? But I think we need the rework, right? Like, the T10 Plus right now is a mess. Throwing perks in there, I don't, the interactions there would be pretty nasty. I think we need to wait and see and hope for a tournament rework, and then we'll see where perks can fit. I really liked one of the ideas that Fuds originally floated about having perks appear sometimes in a tournament, like maybe once a week. One tournament a week, give a little difference between them. And even that idea of having tournaments have different gameplay, like different, affixes and stuff that affect how the tournament plays out, could be a lot of fun, right? Anybody who's a Warcraft player, like kind of the Mythic Plus idea, where we can have some pretty crazy things, happen every so often, and rotate through them to give our tournaments a bit of flavor. But apparently, people are not super excited about having perks. Moving down to $29.99, we have a suggestion to be able to buy for a higher price specific cards rather than have them be random. Pretty downvoted. I mean, part of that is like most of us already have our cards. It's not hard to get all those cards. I mean, it's a lot of farming, but it's pretty straightforward. And I think it's the kind of RNG I don't have an issue with. Right, like there's RNG. Obviously, there's some RNG I hate. I've said quite a bit about it. There's other RNG, like outside the game, like for example, perk choice, ultimate weapon choice, and cards that I think is part of the game. Another thing that I thought would be fun to do would be to revisit some of the lore of the past of the tower, some of the crazy things that has emerged in prior patches or states of the game. Right, I've already talked about earlier about how back in the day our HP didn't scale to damage, even after a few dozen levels, and we were all a glass cannon builds way before we had the research labs and workshops and ultimate weapons to support that. And it was just a whole lot of juggling of mobs with multi-shot until the death ray took them out. One of the most iconic lore figures that emerged at this time was Bob. I know a lot of you guys now refer to the little 2-gem thing we get in the game as Bob. I don't know where that came from. But the original Bob emerged again during this gameplay. You have to remember, we have no health, right? As soon as we get by hit something, we're dead, right? And so it's first blood, game over. And it really was a juggling issue. Our towers just juggled the mobs, pushing them away with knockback until we're able to kill them with Deathify. This is before we had the ability to adjust our orbs. I mean, we were really not doing much but juggling. And the original Bob were basic blocks that would get marked for death in the game, and the tower would ignore them. Right? So they would just come right on through and kill us right away. Tower wouldn't hit them, it wouldn't shoot them, wouldn't knock them back. As soon as the Bob appeared, it would take you out, right? And so they were first talked about, but they were named Bob. I don't know, they were just named Bob as a funny name for them. And it was always talked about how Bob always wanted to come up and hug the tower, right? And so it was one of the first sort of buggy gameplay editions of insta-death to complete RNG that we had in the game. And every time we would play tournament, it was pretty much play until Bob killed us, right? We would regularly post when Bob came in and wiped us out. Bob was a definitive friend and enemy to all of us. And if you look closely at some of the Discord users, you'll see a role referred to Legion of Bob, which is related to some of those early experiences. It stung to be killed by a basic back then as much as it stings to be killed by a basic today. You should not be dying to basics, and it's always sad when you do. All right, so it's New Year's 2023, so I think it's interesting to think a little bit about the game moving forward and make some 2023 predictions for the game. All right, and I don't want to get into specific predictions about specific gameplay mechanics. I think that's fool's gold and moves away from what I think sort of our role as players are. Again, like I said, we should describe what our experience is and let the developer find ways to improve that experience as opposed to dictating specific changes to the game. I think FUDS recognizes the experience that we're having right now in tournaments as being a bit of a kludge as far as a fix goes, and I'm hopeful that a fix is in the works. So I think one of the things we're going to see pretty early in 2023 is an overhaul of the T10 Plus tournament. I think mobs are going to be slowed down quite a bit. I think we're going to be able to move back into 5 times speed. I think we're going to see new mechanics implemented that are designed to make things other than bosses dangerous, but in a mechanism that is not speed based, right? I also predict that it'll be a complete cluster when first implemented. We're all going to be running around like chickens with our heads cut off for quite a while after such an overhaul. Fuds has also hinted at a complete overhaul of range units and how range fires. And I think that fits into the broader idea of toxic upgrades, right? The idea that there shouldn't be upgrades in the game that actually make you worse for having upgraded. And the classic one in this game is range. Upgrading range is very deadly. And I think there's going to be a lot of effort over the next year to address those toxic upgrades to make it so that things like range become a necessity rather than a detriment. I think that's going to have some weird interactions. One of the biggest ones is that I think it's going to affect economy, right? Because if we have to increase our range, that's going to affect things like black hole, spotlight, and other factors as far as our ability to generate the amount of coins we're getting. And I think we're looking at a potential nerf to our overall coin gains if there's not a significant change to the underlying game. So farm those coins while it's raining, because I think moving into the future we're going to see a drop. So I think we might be at peak coin gain for a little while, but we'll see. So again, my major predictions are addressing toxic upgrades, fundamental changes to the way tournaments and even farming works. But again, a focus, right? The idea is bosses can't be the only danger. And I think we're going to see a lot of iterations around that idea of how do we make other mob types dangerous to us in ways that hopefully are not just pure RNG, like the speed increases. Whether or not we're going to deal with other RNG issues such as wave skip, deathify, energy shield interactions, I'm not entirely sure. I can see those lingering for quite a while yet. I'd love to see them addressed, obviously, but I'm not sure what kind of priority they would have. I think we're going to continue to see a handful of buffs to the glass cannon and damage meta. And I think eventually it's going to cross a threshold where it's going to become not only viable, but ridiculously OP. And then I think it's going to be nerfed into oblivion again, because that's the way it goes. Those are some of my 2023 predictions for the tower. All right. I think I'm going to wrap this up here. What I am looking at for you guys is, let me know if you found this interesting, if it should be continued, and what we should do with it, right? I got a lot of ideas in the future, right? I don't want this just to be me sitting up here talking all the time. I want to bring in some of the big players in the Discord community that have been responsible for, some of the meta, some of the tools, some of the guides to talk about things. I would love to be able to bring Fuds in to get some of his perspective on development and any hints that he wants to give us about the direction he's going with the game. I'd love to integrate other members of the community in whatever ways seem interesting. I think there's a lot of directions we can take it. But I mostly just wanted to try to get the ball rolling, see what we can do with this, see if there's even an interest or demand for content like this. Like, I get this is extraordinarily niche content, right? There's like a few hundred of us probably that are involved in this game at the level that anybody would want to sit through a podcast about it. But that's cool. I'm not here to get numbers, right? I'm here to add an element to building the community around this game, which has made this game fun for all of us, right? Again, I think it's the community that is the centerpiece of this game, right? And I want to find ways of interacting with that community and building that community, and that's sort of the main purpose of this, right? Let me know how best I can do that, right? we will go ahead and wrap this up here. Again, first time doing it, nothing fancy, but hopefully, there's some value in this, and hopefully we can, have some fun with this moving forward. If you're still listening, thank you. Thank you for hanging out, and I look forward to your feedback.